From Philharmonic Hall in Lincoln Center, home of the world's greatest musical events, the Shell Oil Company brings you the New York Philharmonic Young People's Concerts under the musical direction of Leonard Bernstein.
And here is Mr. Bernstein.
My dear young friends, welcome to Philharmonic Hall, the new home of the New York Philharmonic here at Lincoln Center. You all know how exciting it is to move into a new home, especially when it's been built just for you. But it's also a little strange and scary. There are so many new things to get used to. In a new house, your bed faces a different direction, and the light switches are never where you expect them to be, and there's somehow a whole other smell of new wood and fresh paint and glue. And then you wonder, will I like the new look of it, the new colors, and is it strongly enough built? Well, in this house of ours, we've already grown used to the new atmosphere. It's a handsome hall, and we're pretty sure it's not going to fall down about our ears. But the thing we're most concerned about in this hall, unlike an ordinary house, is how it sounds. That's the main thing in a concert hall. And I think that probably more time and work and thought have gone into planning the sound of this hall than into anything else about it. Does that surprise you? A lot of people think that the sound of music in a hall depends only on how it's performed. If the orchestra plays well, the music will sound well, which is certainly true up to a certain point. But unless you have a hall that carries the orchestra's sound faithfully and clearly, the orchestra can play like angels and you'll never know the difference. Well, in this hall you should know the difference because it's been scientifically planned to deliver the music to you in all its brilliance, fullness, and clarity. Of course, with all the scientific planning in the world, you can never be absolutely sure in advance of how the hall will sound, because this science, which is called acoustics, A-C-O-U-S-T-I-C-S, acoustics, is a fairly new science. So there's still a certain amount of guesswork involved, and you never really know how it's going to sound until opening night arrives. And even then, it can surprise you by not sounding quite the way you expected it to. And that's exactly what did happen on our opening night. We were all a bit surprised. But Philharmonic Hall has one enormous advantage over the old halls, such as our beloved old Carnegie Hall, and that is that we can keep improving it. You see, in the old days, when they built a hall, whether the acoustics turned out well or badly, you were stuck with them. That's the way it was going to sound forever. But this hall is, one might say, a flexible flyer. The acoustics are permanently changeable. You see this bank of clouds up here over our heads? Well, they can be raised or lowered or tilted at different angles to project the music in different ways. And then all around, behind the back of the stage, there are empty spaces that can be opened or closed or left empty or filled with different kinds of materials. And ever since opening night, the experts have been working around the clock with all these different panels and sound chambers and things to make the acoustics better and better. And now we're going to let you judge for yourselves the results so far. Listen to the sound of Philharmonic Hall as we play for you one of the most brilliant pieces ever written, the Roman Carnival Overture by Berlioz. Well, how's that for sound? You approve? I'm not asking this just to get a hand, I assure you. I really want to know, because you see, to me up here on the podium, it sounds perfectly marvelous. But then the podium is about the worst possible place from which to judge the sound of a hall, because it's right in the middle of the orchestra, so to speak. So I have to rely on your judgment. But of course, if you're going to be judges, you really ought to know something about what you're listening for in a scientific way in this acoustics business. So I think we might have a little look into this new science called acoustics. First of all, it is a science. You must remember that though music is an art, it's always had its scientific side. Music is sound, and sound is caused by vibrations which send out waves that register in your receiving set, which is, of course, your two ears. Now, that's already physics, isn't it? Vibrations, sound waves, receiving set, and all that. But now remember that these waves of sound don't go only to your ears. They go in every direction. And they're either absorbed the way a blotter absorbs water, or they are reflected back the way a mirror reflects light. And that's where physics comes in, because this physical science of acoustics can decide how much sound is going to be absorbed and how much reflected back. And it's that reflected sound coming to your ears a split second after the first direct sound has hit your ears that makes the acoustical difference between one hall and another. Is that too hard? Let's see if I can make it clear by an example. For instance, when the trumpet plays this one note, A, you are hearing two kinds of sound. You're hearing the direct waves from the instrument, and then the reflection of those waves bouncing off the walls and ceilings and finally reaching your ears a split second later. And this later sound, the reflected sound, is called reverberation. Now, that's a hard word that you might confuse with the word echo. They're usually taken to mean the same thing, but they're really two very different things. For instance, if I yell, hello, and then you hear an answering hello, you're hearing an echo, right? But if I yell, hello, and then you hear, oh, dying away in the hall, then it's not an echo, it's reverberation. I'm sure you see the difference. The echo is the last thing in the world you'd want in a concert hall because it makes a double image. You hear everything twice. But reverberation is great to have in a concert hall because without it, the music would sound dead and dull. You need that reverberation to give it what's called liveness. Look, we'll play the last chord of that Roman Carnival overture for you as short and brittle as possible. But if you listen closely, you could hear the chord still lingering in the air for another second or two. We'll do it again. I'll give you another chance to listen. You hear it? That's reverberation. And that's what gives that chord liveness, fullness, and richness. But now comes the big question, how much reverberation should there be? How long should it last? It's easy to understand that the more reverberation there is, the liver and richer and fuller the music will sound. But if there's too much reverberation, the music will sound too full and too rich and become unclear and muddy. So how much is too much? I mean in actual scientific measurements. And here's where the physics and mathematics come in. The acoustical scientists, or acousticians as they're called, made a long, detailed study with special machines of all the best concert halls of the world to try and find out what amount of reverberation there is in the halls where music sounds best. And they found that all the very best halls have a reverberation time of around 2 seconds. That is, that's how long it takes for the sound to die away in the hall. 2 seconds, so that the music is juicy enough, but also clear enough. And so this Philharmonic Hall was designed to have a reverberation time of 2 seconds. Now comes the million-dollar question. How in heaven do you command a hall to have an exact reverberation time of 2 seconds? Well, you can. First of all, you can do it by controlling those areas of the hall that reflect or absorb the sound waves, the walls, the ceilings, the floors, and so on, by carefully choosing what they're to be made of. For instance, concrete reflects sound more than wood, and hardwoods reflect more than softwoods, and so on. And then the cushy carpeting you walk on here doesn't reflect sound at all, but absorbs it, as does the plushy upholstery you're all sitting in. So all these things had to be balanced properly. Then, of course, comes the design of the hall, how high the ceiling is, how wide it is, how long it is, how wide the stage is, how deep it is. I won't go into all the details for you now. That would take hours. But let's just say that after much calculation and discussion between acousticians and architects and musicians and whatnot, they began finally to build the perfect hall. Perfect, at least in theory. But they weren't content to rely only on theory. So last May, we had what they called a tuning week, in which they tuned up this hall, the way a violinist here tunes his instrument. A whole week of rehearsals, day and night, with the Philharmonic playing on this stage under various conductors, and all kinds of music, big and little, old and new. And in the hall, listening very hard, were specially invited conductors, acousticians, recording experts, broadcasting and television experts, plus a number of very sensitive mechanical instruments with very fancy names, like an oscilloscope with cathode ray tubes, and a binaural recording head, and a graphic level recorder, and Lord knows what else. I tell you, it was very spooky. It was like a science fiction movie. And now all those ears, both human and mechanical, were concentrating on every type of sound that came from the stage. Electronic sounds made by special machines, cannon shots, pistol shots, and especially, of course, the sound of the orchestra. And the results showed up the reverberation time very clearly, 2 seconds. But they also showed up a good number of faults. It turned out that this hall was far from perfect last May. First of all, there was not enough intimacy. That sense you should have out there of being really close to the music. So all kinds of experiments were tried. This whole bank of clouds was lowered even further, and then it was angled differently so as to project the music better. And then various kinds of screens were set up around the stage to reflect the music out more to the audience. And even canvas sails were hoisted around the stage to see what effect that would have. And all this time, all those ears, human and mechanical, kept listening and listening. Well, let's see what all that scientific fooling around has accomplished. Have we finally got intimacy in this hall? Let's find out by hearing a quiet, intimate song, an old American lullaby called The Little Horses, in a modern adaptation by Aaron Copland. It will be sung for us, I am happy to say, by one of the loveliest mezzo-sopranos of our country, Miss Shirley Verrett Carter. It's a charming song, isn't it? Lovely song, and I think you'll agree that as sung by Miss Verret Carter in this hall, it had all the intimacy and quietness one could wish for. But intimacy is only one problem that was solved last May. There were lots of others, but perhaps the most interesting one was that the sound we were listening to wasn't the same as the sound this hall would have had if it had been filled with an audience, naturally. Because the thing that absorbs sound waves, even more than those cushy carpets and plushy upholstery, is people. You. You are at this minute soaking up millions of sound waves in your skin and hair and in your clothes. And so the acousticians had to find a way to fake a full hall. And this was done by putting in each seat a folded pad of yellow fiberglass. Every seat in the house. Yellow fiberglass that was scientifically calculated to absorb as much sound as an average human being does. These pads were smilingly called instant people. And during that week, we came to know them like dear old friends. Here comes an instant person now. Take a good look. Isn't he sweet? And all that week, he sat out there where you are with his friends, and the orchestra kept playing, the hall kept changing, and the ears kept listening and taking notes. And they've been listening ever since, while the scientists have been making adjustments, until the hall has been brought to the degree of liveness, warmth, and intimacy that you've been hearing today in the Berlioz Overture and in the Copland song. Okay, we have liveness, warmth, intimacy. But now what about the problem of clarity, clearness? You see, it's possible to get a hall to sound live and warm, but that's no guarantee at all that it's going to sound clear. So let's listen to another small piece now that tests the clearness of our hall, the first movement of Vivaldi's Concerto for 4 solo violins and orchestra. And the acoustical problem here is to be able to hear the voice of each violin separately and clearly, and at the same time to feel the richness of their blend along with the orchestra. So here comes a chance to test your own ears and see if you can hear that balance of clearness and richness as we play the first movement of the Vivaldi Concerto in B minor with our own first 4 violins as soloists. Mr. Corigliano, Mr. Gulino, Mr. Bernstein, no relation, and Mr. Dembinski. so far, so good. Tested a lot of problems, but we haven't tested them all by a long shot. That Vivaldi concerto we just played is all strings, don't forget. Violins, violas, cellos, bass. But now what happens when the sounds get mixed and you have a cello playing with the flute, a saxophone, a drum, a trumpet, a clarinet, plus a speaking voice? That's the peculiar combination we're going to hear now. And the problem this time is one of blending. You see, all those different kinds of sounds have to reach your ears with the same strength, clarity, intimacy, and so on, and they must combine together so that the weaving of sounds makes one texture, like a beautiful tapestry or a Persian carpet. And this texture doesn't depend only on what the conductor and the players do. The stage must also be designed so that every part and corner of it reflects the sounds we make with equal strength and clarity. The texture also depends, and this is very important, on the ability of the orchestra to hear itself well, the ability of each player to hear all the other players clearly, because unless the cello can hear the trumpet and the drummer can hear the clarinet and so on, the dangers of not playing exactly together are pretty great. Now, the piece we're going to hear now is a especially tough test in togetherness for this hall to pass, because the 6 instruments that will play it are scattered all over the stage. The cello is here on my left, the flute's behind me, the clarinet behind him, the trumpet behind him, the saxophone to his right, and the drum way over there in the corner. And to make it all more difficult, I will be reciting the speaking part here as well as conducting the players, so you can see that this is a real test of the acoustics on the stage. We all have to hear one another absolutely clearly in order to be absolutely together. Now, this peculiar piece we're going to do is from a suite called Facade by the famous British composer Sir William Walton. And what it is a series of charming accompaniments by those 6 instruments to some very strange and amusing poems by Dame Edith Sitwell. The one we're doing is a sort of Spanish number. It's part tango and part paso doble. And if you don't understand what the words mean, don't worry, neither do I. But the trick is to hear every instrument clearly, as well as my tongue-twisting nonsense words, and to get some fun out of it, I hope. Here goes. When Don Pasquito arrived at the seaside, where the donkeys hide-tide braid, he saw the bandito Joe in a black cape, whose slack shape waved like the sea. Thetis rhoda, treatis loading, wheatis silver like the sea, the lovely treatis, sweetest foam, erodus, lotus is the G, will, steal, the wheat king's luggage like Babel, before the League of Nations grew. So Joe put the luggage and the label in the pocket of Flo the kangaroo. Through trees like rich hotels that bode of dream the seas fled she, carrying the load and goading the road through the marine sea to the sea. Don Pasquito, the road is eloping, with your luggage though heavy and large. You must follow and leave your moping, ride to my guidance and charge. When Don Pasquito returned from the road's end, where vanilla-colored ladies ride, from Sevilla, his Montillard bride and young friend were forgetting their mentor and guide. For the lady and her friend from Le Touquet, in the very shady trees upon the sand, were plucking a white satin bouquet of foam, while the sand's brassy band blared in the wind. Don Pasquito hid where the leaves drip with sweet, but a word stung him like a mosquito. For what they hear, they repeat. Well, that little experiment seemed to work. We were all together. But you see, we've been making our tests with little music, small combinations. So now let's get back to big sounds. And the one big thing left to test is what the acousticians call dynamic range. In other words, does this hall respond equally well to all degrees of loudness within the same piece? from a tiny murmur all the way to the whole orchestra going full blast. Well, the best test of dynamic range I can think of is that great piece of fireworks, Tchaikovsky's Overture 1812, because it begins very intimately with only 6 solo strings and then runs the whole dynamic range to a full orchestra, plus at the end an extra brass band which will be playing over there, plus at the end the deafening roar of cannon backstage over there, plus the deafening jangle of church bells. In fact, I can't think of a better way to test a hall for all the aspects of acoustics: for liveness, intimacy, warmth, brilliance, clarity, blend, texture, dynamic range, and all the rest than this 1812 overture by Tchaikovsky. And if the house doesn't fall down about our ears at the end of this piece, and if you can still hear yourselves think, then you'll know we've got a great new hall, which luckily will and can become greater and greater as those ears keep listening and adjustments continue to be made. The experts think it may take as much as a full year of further experimentation before they arrive at the absolutely perfect hall. Meanwhile, we've already got a marvelous hall in which we can look forward to many more happy hours of exciting music. Now, here is Tchaikovsky's Overture 1812.